Hi everyone. Well, today we need to talk about cyclists. I mean, this new highway code, what a joke. I mean, it was bad enough when cyclists were riding illegally to abreast, but now they're allowed to. And what about riding down the middle of the road? They're allowed to do that. I mean, come on. If they want to use our roads, they need to pay road tax. And what about insurance? Nobody's insured on a bike. Nobody's trained. These people don't have a clue. It's a free-for-all. And don't get me started on red lights. Look, I know it's true because it was in the media. But, of course, the truth is far less dramatic. What I'd like to do now is just explain what the true facts are and also give some sort of insight to drivers on why cyclists do the things they do. Now, having said this, not all cyclists are sensible, not all car drivers are sensible. But it's at this point, I guess, quite a few people will switch off because they can see that this video's not going the way they thought it was going to go. But for those of you that do decide to stay, what I want to do is just try and explain why cyclists do the things they do and how we can all get on better. So I just need to change my hat and then we'll get on with the video. All set? Let's go. What I want to do with today's video is just try and put some meat on the bones of the new highway code rules. The irony is that many of these rules concerning cyclists are actually new. What it does go to demonstrate is that by thinking they're new, many motorists prove that they've not picked up the highway code since they passed their test. And here I have to be honest and say, I was one of those. It wasn't until I did my British cycling training that I had to pick up the highway code again. Let's get one thing out of the way before we really get started, and that's lycra. Whenever I see a comment starting with or containing lycra clad, you know which way the conversation's going to go. Now let's face it, lycra's not a good look for some of us, me included. The reason we wear it is not to look like Bradley Wiggins or one of our other cycling heroes. It's comfort. Now it's true, if you're riding a bike for up to 10-20 miles, there's no real need for it. But when you're doing long days in the saddle, you know, maybe 150-200 miles, you need some comfort. And lycra is breathable, it has a nice seat pad, so it keeps us comfortable on those long rides. A lot of motorists are concerned about the new highway code, and I think part of that problem is that it's been poorly communicated. We've really heard nothing from the government, and it's been left to the press to come out with stupid comments like, you know, motorists at war with cyclists and cyclists now ride in the middle of the road. And of course it's absolute nonsense. Right. What I'm going to try and show you in this video is why cyclists do what they do. There is usually a reason for it, and it's often to make things safer for all of us, including the motorist. Very often as well, our actions can save the motorists from trouble. And for example, when we're passing through a narrow part of the road where there's probably bollards in the middle for people to cross safely, a refuge, car drivers will sometimes try to squeeze through. What you have to remember is many cyclists carry one of these. the equivalent of a car's dash cam. And I've previously caught drivers that have tried to pass me through those narrow sections too closely. So by riding in the centre of the lane, it stops anyone attempting that. And most good drivers won't anyway. But what it also does is protects the car driver from a fine. I'll give you some examples. Riding two abreast. It was in the previous highway code that cyclists should not ride more than two abreast. The irony is that riding two abreast can actually help motorists. They should give enough space to pass, so that means going into the opposing lane if it's clear. If it's not clear, you wait. Now, I had a ride once with about, I think I had 8 riders, well, 8 including me, and because I knew that drivers would get upset with them riding two abreast, and I didn't want these new riders to be uncomfortable and be put off by being shouted at, horns blared at. As soon as we had a couple of cars building up behind, I put them into single file. Now that meant those drivers had a much longer line to pass. So instead of having to pass 4 pairs, they had to pass a long line of stretched out cyclists, and they couldn't get by. Now, had I doubled them up again, they'd have got by easily. Right. So there you have a situation where many motorists were ignorant of the existing rules, and it was actually working against them. Another misconception is this business about riding in the centre of the road. Well, the centre of the road is where you can see the white lines. That's the broken white lines. Cyclists have always been allowed to ride in the centre of their lane. And there's some really good reasons for doing it. And I think if drivers understood, then they would appreciate why it's being done. However, it's incumbent upon the cyclist to do it properly. I've heard reports recently about cyclists just riding down the centre of a lane, or even sometimes in the middle of the road, because they think they're allowed to do it, so they'll do it now. That's nonsense. There's a reason for doing it, and it's the only time we should do it. So a bit later on, I'll actually show you those techniques. And if you see a cyclist doing it, and doing it properly, please just accept it. Sadly, we seem to be in a world where it's just all about us, the individual. We leave too little time to get to places. Many people are welded to their mobile phones, so if it beeps while they're driving, they've got to have a look. What many don't realise is that just that one slip, playing with your phone, sending a text, or rushing because you're late, could land you with a lifetime of grief. If you kill somebody, you're going to live with that for the rest of your life. Now, some of that life might be spent in jail, and I think you'll find those sort of penalties will increase in time. So it's in all of our interests, cyclists, drivers, take more care, take a little bit more time, just be considerate. It's not difficult. Now, you might think I'm lecturing, and I don't mean to. My message is for everyone that is on the road, be they pedestrians, cyclists, horse riders and drivers. And if I sound quite passionate, it's because after being knocked off my bike on one occasion by a driver and being almost knocked off by another where his wing mirror actually hit me, and close passed on more occasions than I can remember, it does make you a bit passionate. Now I've got a lorry looking to come out here, so I made some good eye contact there. Now I wanted to get on that cycle path and I missed it, so I'm now actually going to come in now. One of the common refrains from drivers is, and understandably, is we spend all this money on cycle paths and cyclists don't use them. But what I'm going to show you now is why cyclists avoid cycle paths. So this path is a shared path, it's delineated. It doesn't really matter if a pedestrian walks one side or the other, we'll go around them. But here's the problem, we now have to cross the road. Now, the new rule is that vehicles should give way to the person going straight ahead. So you can see the Sainsbury's lorry went by, and so did the U-Move estate agent. So they clearly don't know the rules. I'm riding today in a big bright orange jacket. I've also got flashing light on the front, so there's no excuse for me not being seen. They clearly didn't know the rules. Now, it didn't bother me in the slightest because I'm in no hurry today, but it just shows that these rules need to be explained. So the rule is that if you're entering a road or leaving a road at a junction, you must give way to those going straight ahead. That includes cyclists and it includes pedestrians. So we've got another road junction here. Now, some cyclists would say, well, I have right of way, I can go straight ahead. That'd be pretty foolish, as you just saw with those vehicles that didn't follow that new rule. So every time we come to a junction, we've got to slow down, have a good look, and then move off again. My rule is, it's no good laying in hospital in traction knowing you had right of way. So build proper cycle paths with give way signs on any intersections so that cars do stop, and then you'll find cyclists will very, very happily use them. Well, I'm guessing he was plugged into his headphones, so he didn't hear me no matter how much I rang the bell. But we're on a shared path. He's a pedestrian, so slow down and give way. If necessary, you've got to get off. But it's equally incumbent upon pedestrians to keep all their senses going. And plugging yourself into music doesn't help. This is a shared cycle path and footpath, so in terms of the hierarchy we would have to give way to pedestrians. I've always done that anyway, it's common sense. One of the things we have to watch for here are people coming out of these various turnings. Now again, under the new rules they should give way, but I wouldn't bank on it. So this is a pretty good path really, it keeps us off the main A52, but you'll see here shortly this is where we have a problem. Partly you can see how badly maintained this is, even for pedestrians. But when we get down to here, you'll see that the cycleway ends. And where it ends is right before a very narrow railway bridge where lorries constantly get stuck, and also probably one of the worst roundabouts in the area. So I'm now having a good look behind me. Road's clear. Now, this is where riding in the centre of the lane comes in. Now, it's not the centre of the road, as the Daily Mail would say, it's the centre of the lane. Centre of the road is where that double white line is. But you can see I'm in the centre of the lane to stop anybody trying to overtake me as I come under that bridge. Now, checking the roundabout, I'm staying in the centre of my lane because I'm going straight ahead. And I've now joined this queue of traffic. Now, a very good reason for staying in the centre of the lane is that cars will turn left up ahead, and if I'm over in the left of the lane, a car could come past me and left hook me. So by staying in the centre of the lane, I'm out in the clear, people can see me and they can't get past. But as you see, I've now moved right the way back to a metre from the curb. So if anyone does need to get by, they can. But now I'm coming up to some traffic lights, so I'm staying in the centre of the lane again. I did check behind me and the road was clear. And now I'm moving back over to the left of the lane. Easy, really. Now I'm coming up to another section where being in the middle of the lane is the right thing to do. Looking over my shoulder, nothing behind. So I'm now in the centre of the lane, and the reason is the road narrows at that centre refuge. And I have had cars try to get by me at that point and almost knock me off. Got lights ahead, so I'm staying in the centre of the lane. Can actually see from my radar that I've got two cars behind. I'm now pulling back to the left and they can safely get past. But we have noticed lately, since the introduction of the new highway code rules, or clarification, that we are being given much more space. Now, I would say that on a typical 60-mile ride, for example, we'd have at least 2 reportable close passes. So that shows, with the number of cars passing us, that it's really not too much of a problem. The majority of drivers, like the majority of cyclists, are sensible. It's just a few that let us down. But it's certainly become much more clear to us that drivers are giving us much more space. So I thought I'd just come along here just to test out the theory. Because the last time I did this for a video, I had 2 close passes on video in very short succession. Morning.
Sorry.
That's all right, no problem.
This has got a foul.
Oh.
Mine.
So now we're having a quiet little ride out of Wyndham Park along the beautiful riverside path. So it's a good time to talk about road tax. It doesn't matter how many times People are told that there's no such thing as road tax. It was abolished in the 30s. And what you pay, vehicle excise duty, is based on your emissions. So when I see those sort of comments, I don't even bother replying, because you'll never get through to some people. But the fact is, if your car doesn't emit any dangerous emissions, then you won't pay vehicle excise duty. So those that say cyclists should pay for the roads, well, what about electric car users? The fact is that vehicle excise duty, which is based on emissions, it's not road tax. It's nothing to do with the roads. That money just goes into central government funds and it's used for all sorts of things. Roads are actually paid for from general taxation. So if we pay income tax, if we pay VAT, council tax, all those sort of taxes go towards the roads, or should do. So when you say you pay road tax and cyclists don't, apart from the fact that many cyclists are in fact car users, such as me, we also pay lots of VAT on things. So I would argue cyclists are actually paying for the upkeep of roads that are more damaged by cars than they are by bicycles. And also somebody that doesn't use a car or a bicycle and just walks is actually paying for your road upkeep. Now this is an interesting setup here. The road has got a central refuge, but there's enough room, so I'm a metre out from the curb. But we're coming up to what is a horrible roundabout. What I'm going to do is go all the way around this roundabout. So what I need to do is start to move to the right. I'm looking behind me and I'm signalling to the right, and I'm staying in the centre of the lane. So I'm now signalling and I'm staying exactly as it would be if I was in a car. So I'm coming around, I'm making eye contact with drivers and signalling off and back the other way. Now surprisingly, the changes in the highway code suggest that because traffic must give way to a cyclist, that cyclist could actually go all the way around that roundabout in the outside lane. Personally, I think that's quite dangerous. I wouldn't do it, because it relies on all drivers understanding the highway code. And I think for many drivers, the only time they look at the highway code is when they're taking their test. So I'm coming back now down to a junction. I've just signalled to come out slightly because we're slowing down and we've got a central refuge, but also we've got cars coming out of a car park here. And if I'm too close to the edge of the road, they may well not see me. So here they can see me. I'm making sure I make eye contact. And again in the centre of the lane. Nobody's getting upset. I'm not causing anybody any hold-ups. And if I so wished, I could filter here and I could go to the front of the queue. The reason I'm not doing it, A, I'm not in a hurry, but B, we're in a shopping area. Somebody could decide they'll jump out at the lights and go off and do their shopping. and they may not look behind them. Okay, we've got a green, but what I'm doing now is moving over to the left-hand side of the road, but I've actually got lots of parked cars ahead. Now, there's a big danger here that these drivers could be just about to get out the car and I get whacked. So I'm staying clear of the doors. Now, the new highway code suggests that we use the Dutch reach method, which is this, but you can't rely on every driver doing that, so best to stay clear. Hiya. Thank you. Just on your right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the common complaints we hear is that cyclists aren't insured, and they should be insured. But of course there's no rule to say they should be insured. But it might interest you to know that British Cycling and Cycling UK both offer their members third-party insurance as part of their membership. And there are over 200,000 members of those organisations. So 200,000 cyclists on the road more than likely have got insurance, and possibly more because some people take out their own. Now let's contrast that with the 80,000 drivers in 2020 that were convicted of not having insurance for their car. Why aren't we worrying about that? Because those 80,000 were only the ones that were caught. What about the ones that are driving around with no insurance? Now, you and I, as drivers, are paying for that through our increased insurance premiums. But nobody seems to worry about that. It often seems that it's just a big stick to hit cyclists with. And while we're talking statistics, in 2020, 40,000 drivers were convicted of driving under the influence of drink or drugs. So who should we be worrying about? 15 kilos of bicycle or a tonne and a half of car being driven by somebody under the influence of drink or drugs, and possibly, more than likely, carrying no insurance. 4,000 drivers were convicted in 2020 of dangerous driving, and 200 actually were convicted of causing death by dangerous driving. Let's just imagine the heartbreak that causes, either for the driver, who may well lose their liberty, family deprived of a father or mother, and before all of that, they've got to live with the fact that they've killed another human being. And I would say to drivers who feel that really it's nothing to do with them, they'll do as they please, they're not interested in rules, then I'll appeal to your selfish side. I'll just remind you that you could land up in jail, losing your licence for a long time, massive fines that affect your family. So it's just not worth it. In 2020, there were 250,000 driving convictions. So these are people that are in charge of 1.5 tonnes of effectively offensive weapon. But you expected me to jump that red light, didn't you? We often hear complaints about cyclists driving through red lights. And I can tell you, cyclists hate that as much as you do as drivers. I've also seen drivers going through red lights, but that doesn't tend to make the press so much. Now what we're coming up to now is in fact the only one of these in our town. It's an advanced stop box for cyclists. Now the idea is that we can go forward, get into this box. What it allows me to do is have the drivers behind me now see that I'm here. If they're going to turn left, they're not going to left hook me because they can't. But as soon as I move away, I'm moving over to the left again. So I'm not impeding anybody. And interestingly, the car I was in front of did turn left. So if I'd have stayed in the cycle lane there, may not have seen me and would have turned across my path. What I just did there at those traffic lights is there were two cars waiting behind. I knew that they wouldn't get by in that phase of the lights if I was ahead of them, so I let them through. And they were really happy with that. I got on my way, didn't hold me up at all. And hopefully, if they didn't have a good opinion of cyclists, maybe I've helped improve it a bit. I think the important thing with any of this is communication. In all the manoeuvres that I've demonstrated, you couldn't see it on camera, but I was signalling, having a good look over my shoulder first, and just making sure that anyone around me knew what I intended to do. We had a situation last week, I think it was, when we had a big transporter truck behind us. The driver couldn't get by. We held him up for 30 seconds to 45 seconds, I would guess. But as soon as it was safe for us to do so, we pulled over to let him through. He was very pleased and didn't hold us up at all. Everybody was happy. Now I've got a situation now on this narrow road. I've got a car behind me. The driver's sitting patiently. I'm not holding them up for very long, but as soon as I can, I'm going to call them through. And it's just courtesy. And there you go. A nice little honk of thank you. And another cyclist that's gone up in his estimation, hopefully. Now, of course, one of the things that can cause cyclists not to want to stop is Strava. Now, for those that don't know, Strava is an app that allows us to record our rides, but they have Strava segments, and people either try to be the best in that segment, or indeed they try to beat their personal bests on a ride. Now, in those cases, they're not going to want to stop and let somebody through. Now, okay, they'll probably be faster, but it doesn't help. So personally, I think Strava has a lot to answer for, especially as I've seen people making Strava segments on shared paths. So that's just encouraging cyclists to go flat out on a shared path. It's not a good idea. Personally, I think it's vital for cyclists to have some training. And you don't have to do anything formally. Of course, you can enrol on an official course, but many children are already trained at school through Bikeability. Maybe they need to train their parents. But the other simple way of getting some training is to go out with another cyclist that's trained, a club, British Cycling Let's Ride, or Breeze rides. They're very welcoming, and Breeze in particular, they're ladies only rides, so if that's what you prefer, then sign up with them. It's free and you'll be made very welcome, and you'll certainly pick up some tips. But above all, it's important to be confident. You need to let people know what you're doing, and you need to control your section of the road, but don't hold anybody up. So while we're on the subject of training and making sure that people are properly trained, how about we campaign for drivers to have to do a review test with an instructor, say an hour, every 5 years, just to make sure they're current. I passed my test, I think it was 50 years ago, and I'm sure I could have picked up bad habits. I've tried not to, but it can happen. And as I said, I certainly didn't pick up the highway code until I did my British cycling training. Now, if you're a private pilot, which I was once, you have to have a revalidation of your licence. Now, you might think, well, that's sensible because an aircraft can do a lot more damage, but frankly, you don't see many aircraft bumping into each other or having to overtake each other. The road is a far, far more dangerous place, so what about that idea? Another contentious issue is cyclist registration. Now, personally, I have absolutely no problem at all having a registration number. If I do something crazy and somebody reports me, then I'll have to live with that. And hopefully it would stop me doing crazy things. But the fact is, it just doesn't work. It was tried in Switzerland where they had a cyclist registration scheme, but it was stopped because they found it was just too expensive. It cost more than they gained in revenue. It's also interesting that the Boris bikes in London, the hire bikes, also have a registration number. I was reading that those reports they've had about people cycling dangerously on a Boris bike have never included a registration number. So it's unlikely a registration system would work. The good news is, though, that in some cities, red light jumpers are being stopped. The police are situating themselves at traffic lights and pulling over any cyclists that do jump red lights. So that has to be a good thing. People cycle for many reasons. It could be for commuting to work. Certainly a lot quicker in cities to commute if you can than sitting in queues with cars. Or it could be for leisure. And it's a fact that cyclists cost the NHS a lot less than those that sit behind the wheel of a car all the time. We're less likely to have heart problems, we're less likely to have diabetes. So it's a good thing, and it's effectively saving you money. Well, if you've stuck with me to the end, thank you very much. I hope that this has given some sort of insight into how cyclists behave on the road, why we do what we do, but also hopefully it's given a few tips to people that are maybe a bit nervous about cycling on the road. The fact is that the roads are becoming much more congested, and it will continue to happen. I mean, you look at the amount of house building that's going on around the country, then it needs to have infrastructure to cope with that. Now, the more cars that we have on the road, the slower things are going to be. So if we can cycle, so much the better. Now, not everybody can. Some people have got to use cars, and we understand that. There are journeys I use my car for because I couldn't possibly cycle. So what we need to do is really act as a team on the road. So instead of screaming and shouting and insulting people for making genuine mistakes, we really need to anticipate mistakes before they happen and take evasive action. Now, of course, there are extremists in all forms of transport. I've had pedestrians stand in the way on a shared path to make the point they're not going to let me through. I've already said I've had many close passes. I've also seen cyclists do some ridiculous things, riding at speed on a pavement that they shouldn't even be riding on. Those people won't be listening now, I'm pretty sure. They will have turned off at the beginning of this video. But the majority of road users are sensible, they are courteous, and all we need to do is think a little bit beyond ourselves and think of others and how we're interacting with others, be a little bit more courteous to each other. If you enjoyed the video, I'd be grateful if you give it a like. If you didn't like it, also give it a dislike. But if you like this sort of video and you want to know more about cycling and just generally enjoying cycling, then please subscribe. It'd be great to have you along. So thank you for watching, and I just wish you safe journeys.